I demand you hand over those documents immediately. You are disrupting this flight.
These documents are sealed, Captain. You have no right.
Hey, I'm Dr. Vivian Holloway. And there's a moment in every black professional's life when you realize your accomplishments. Your PhD from Stanford, your decades of service, even the president's own nomination, can be instantly erased by a single, familiar glance. You're simply reduced to fitting the image they hold for you. Or, more accurately, the one they don't. My story starts 6 weeks into my job as the director of the Federal Aviation Authority, or FAA, the first black woman to ever hold that office. I was heading to Chicago for the most important meeting of my career, pushing through my new, tough safety protocols. Think a $250 million headache for the big airline CEOs, especially Global Skyways, led by a notorious old-school guy named Robert Vance. Now, my team, they wanted to book me the usual FAA way, security detail, private lounge, straight to the jet, but I said no. I needed to see the system as the average passenger sees it, without the FAA shield. So I booked a regular ticket using my personal account, applied my lifetime frequent flyer upgrade, and confirmed seat 4C, first class, on Global Skyways Flight 1990. I deliberately wore comfortable, understated clothes, a tailored black suit, cashmere sweater. Just another traveler. As I made my way through security and toward the gate, those little things started happening. The TSA agent scrutinizing my ID longer than the white businessman behind me. The gate agent not even making eye contact. You know the drill, right? It's never one big thing. It's the constant, cumulative weight of 1,000 paper cuts. Before I boarded, I reached into my briefcase and touched the Distinguished Flying Cross, the medal my father, a decorated Tuskegee Airman, earned in World War II. He wasn't allowed to fly commercial after the war because of his skin, and I carried that medal to every battle, big or small. It was a reminder, they couldn't stop us from flying. We just built our own path. I stepped onto the plane, exchanged a quick, professional nod with the lead flight attendant, Brenda. She was everything I'd expected, severe, blonde, and armed with a cold, assessing stare. I found 4C, settled in, and pulled out my notes, ready for a grueling 7 hours. That's when the descent began. About 20 minutes later, Thomas, Brenda's protege, a young attendant with a forced, rigid smile, appeared. "Ms. Holloway," he said, his voice flat, professional, and entirely devoid of warmth. "I need to speak with you about your seat." I looked up, confused. "Everything's fine. 4C is confirmed." "The computer shows otherwise," he insisted, pulling out his tablet. "There was an error with your upgrade. We need this seat for a priority passenger." I kept my voice low and even. "I paid for this seat. I'd like to see the alleged computer error." Thomas's smile vanished. "We have a full flight and need to complete boarding. We can discuss the details after you move." Then Brenda appeared, looming in the aisle, her expression hardening. She already knew the game. She wasn't running a customer service inquiry. She was executing a directive. Unbeknownst to me, they'd just finished their pre-flight briefing. The crew knew the airline ran a shadow policy. They called it the Opal Protocol. It was never written down, but it dictated that certain demographics, regardless of status, should be reaccommodated out of first class to maintain the desired aesthetic for the real P1 customers, the white, corporate executives. Thomas was simply following the unwritten rule, believing I was an inconvenient, misplaced upgrade. I refused to give in, but my phone vibrated in my pocket. It was a text from the Secretary of Transportation regarding an urgent safety issue. I glanced at Brenda and Thomas, then at the glowing screen. The meeting in Chicago was critical. I couldn't risk delaying the entire aircraft and missing the most important vote of the year just to fight for my seat. "Very well," I said quietly, a quiet fury brewing beneath the surface. "I will move. But know this, I am moving under protest, and this matter is far from resolved." I gathered my belongings. As I stepped into the aisle, a kind, elderly woman named Esther Brooks, platinum status, fierce demeanor, leaned out and squeezed my arm. "Don't you let them get away with this, honey," she whispered. And there, 2 rows back, a subtle movement, Gabriel, a quiet travel journalist in 3B, had his phone angled, recording everything. He'd seen the performance, and he was documenting the corporate cruelty. Thomas, with a triumphant smirk he couldn't hide, didn't lead me to an open economy plus seat. He led me past the entire length of the plane, past the rows of weary passengers, until we reached the literal last row, seat 42B, the middle seat, right next to the lavatories. It was a deliberate, calculated humiliation. A clear message: you don't belong here, and this is where we put people who forget their place. I sat down, my back stiff, my dignity intact but bruised. Beside me, a wonderful, wise woman named Mrs. Ruth Jenkins, a black elder with silver hair and eyes that had seen too much, welcomed me. "They got you, too, I see," she said, her voice warm, carrying the weary cadence of generations. "New system, same old story. But we sit with our heads high, don't we?" And in that moment, looking around the confined, loud space, the true engine of the airline, I knew this wasn't just a slight against Vivian Holloway. This was the system revealing its rot. And the FAA director, flying incognito, had just been handed the exact, ugly evidence she needed to burn that system down. The fight for my seat was over. The fight for all seats was about to begin. I was sitting in row 42, the actual last row. You can't get any further back than that. The constant flushing sounds a perfect soundtrack to my mounting rage. My blood was boiling, but I focused on the medal in my pocket. Patience. Vivian. They gave you the evidence. Use it. The plane finished pushback, and the captain came on the speaker, the usual cheerful routine. That's when my phone lit up again. Secretary of Transportation calling. This wasn't a scheduling check. This was urgent. I answered, keeping my voice low. "Yes, Secretary, this is Holloway. I'm on flight 1990 now." Suddenly, Thomas, the attendant, was back. He saw the phone, and all his earlier smirks were replaced by rigid authority. All phones off for takeoff. "I don't care who you're talking to, that's FAA regulation," he barked, his voice carrying through the quiet cabin. I paused, looked him dead in the eye, and continued my conversation. "I believe the immediate issue is a pattern of deferred safety checks on the older fleet models. I need to get this to the maintenance teams now." Thomas was furious. He leaned down, his face inches from mine, asserting his small patch of power. "Listen to me. I don't care if it's the president. End the call or we return to the gate, and you are removed." A tiny, knowing chuckle came from Mrs. Jenkins beside me. "Oh, honey," she murmured. "He is about to learn the hardest lesson of his life." I ended the call, keeping my gaze locked on Thomas. I reached into my briefcase, pulled out my official credentials, laminated, embossed, impossible to dispute, and handed them to him. "Mr. Bennett," I said, my voice cutting through the cabin air, amplified by the sudden silence. "This call was from the Secretary of Transportation regarding a Level 1 safety matter. You need to inform Captain Vance immediately that Director Vivian Holloway of the FAA is on board. And I'll be reviewing his safety logs before this aircraft leaves the tarmac." Thomas's face went from indignant red to a sickly, ashen grey. He stared at the card, the gold seal, the official title, then back at me, sitting in the worst seat on the plane. The FAA director. The woman whose policies were about to cost his company $250 million. The sheer absurdity of the moment made him stutter a pathetic, the director, before he bolted toward the cockpit. The shockwave went through the plane like a lightning strike. Passengers who had just watched me being humiliated were now whispering in disbelief. Captain Vance, a red-faced, sputtering man, appeared minutes later with Brenda, whose jaw was practically on the floor. He tried to pull me to the cockpit for a private discussion. "Captain," I announced over the cabin speakers, my voice calm but firm. The seating change was very public. "The resolution will be 2. I'll remain right here." And that's when the last row revolution truly began. I initiated an immediate, impromptu federal investigation. Right there, from row 42. I used the FAA database access on my tablet to pull up preliminary maintenance records, while simultaneously taking testimony from the passengers. Mrs. Jenkins told me about the decades of subtle discrimination she'd endured. Esther Brooks and other first-class passengers confirmed the crew's differential treatment. Gabriel, the journalist, provided his crystal-clear video footage to the investigators who had just boarded the plane. And Sophia, a young, brave flight attendant, cracked. She came to the back and, in hushed tones, confirmed the Opal Protocol, the secret, racist coding in the system. The most damning revelation came from connecting the dots. Sophia revealed that not only did the protocol affect seating, but the older, less prioritized fleet models, the ones flying routes associated with the undesired aesthetic, were the same ones receiving deferred maintenance checks. This wasn't just corporate prejudice. It was a safety hazard tied directly to race. The dominoes fell instantly. I signed the executive order right there. FAA safety inspectors were to meet the plane in Chicago. And I did something radical. I stayed in row 42 for the entire flight, conducting the investigation, taking testimony, listening to the very passengers the airline had tried to silence. That simple act transformed the last row, a place of intended shame, into the most powerful seat on the plane. By the time we landed in Chicago, CEO Robert Vance had already been placed on immediate administrative leave by his board. The news channels were running split screens, my face and the shocking, crystal-clear footage of my humiliation. The ultimate confrontation came not in the FAA meeting, but 2 weeks later, during the congressional oversight hearing. Vance, trying to save his career, insisted the whole thing was an isolated incident of employee error. I looked at the committee, and I spoke my truth. The problem, gentlemen, is not just the flight attendant who enforced the discrimination. The problem is the system that taught her that my seat was negotiable, but Mr. Vance's profits were not. The system that used complex algorithms, the Opal protocol, to encode racial bias into service delivery and even safety resource allocation. This wasn't one mistake, it was institutional failure. The result? Unprecedented. The FAA instituted the Holloway reforms, fundamentally changing how airlines allocate resources and manage customer service, prioritizing equity and safety transparency above all else. Global Skyways faced a $412 million penalty and was forced to establish the Passenger Equity Commission, which I was thrilled to name Mrs. Ruth Jenkins as its honorary chair. Thomas and Brenda? They lost their jobs and faced civil suits. But the most satisfying part of the entire affair was watching the change unfold. 2 years later, I flew Global Skyways again, this time on official FAA business. I boarded the plane, and the flight attendant, a kind, young woman, greeted me with genuine warmth. I smiled, then walked past the first-class suites, past the main cabin, and deliberately chose a seat in row 40, near the window. It was still the back, but now, it was a position of choice, of perspective, and of quiet victory. The view from the back is always the clearest. It's where you see the engine running, where you feel the turbulence, and where you realize that true power isn't about the title on your door, it's about the resolve in your heart and the people you choose to sit next to. So, I have to ask you, when you see that slight, that microaggression, that injustice unfolding in public, whether it's on a plane, in a store, or in your office, do you look away, or do you angle your phone and become a part of the last row revolution? Let me know in the comments below. Was I justified in staying in the back? What would you have done when Thomas demanded you hand over the phone? Share your thoughts, and let's keep fighting for equitable skies.